Hey everybody, how are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and today I want to continue the conversation that continues to be discussed by many people, both in the comment sections of my videos as well as across the internet, about The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 and the potential Nintendo Switch Pro and how they just might line up. Now, I'll be honest with you guys, this is not really a topic or a concept that I've personally spent a whole lot of time believing in or thinking about, just because in order to have really strong feelings on this, like so many people out there do, you have to also have very strong feelings about the existence and impending release of a Nintendo Switch Pro. Which, if you know me and have been following me for any length of time recently, from several months to maybe several years back, you know that I'm not really diehard on this Nintendo Switch Pro hype train. Of course, that doesn't mean that I think it absolutely won't happen, because I very much think that there is a window open for a Switch Pro or a Super Switch or a Switch Plus or a Switch Up to possibly exist. Like, yes, there is a chance that some kind of upgraded Nintendo Switch might be releasing sometime soon, and if that's the case, then who knows what could happen. At that point, the sky is the limit. Does Metroid Prime 4 become an ideal example to showcase a new Nintendo Switch Pro? Does a new Mario Kart game or a new Mario game become a good game to do such a thing? Maybe even a new Pokemon game if it comes out later in the year, or the focus of today's topic, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2. Of course, before I dive any deeper into this topic, I do want to remind you, as I always do, that I am constantly trying to grow the channel. I make and upload several videos every single week here on Rule of Two Review, so of course, as you watch, if you like what I'm doing and you like what you hear, then hopefully you will consider subscribing to the channel to help us cross more milestones very soon. So man, there is a huge can of worms to open up when discussing this topic, both from the perspective of the release of Breath of the Wild 2, and then of course all the theories and possibilities around a Nintendo Switch Pro. I mean, at this point, I think you guys know that I, along with the rest of us, am crazy excited for Breath of the Wild 2. I am a huge Zelda fan. It is my second favorite franchise of all time. And I also think Breath of the Wild, the original game from 2017, is a top 5 all-time video game ever created. And then, of course, going back to the Switch Pro concept, I mean, I've used this phrase several times over the past year, and I'm going to use it here again. And it's that I personally have been on a bit of a roller coaster of thoughts and emotions about the whole concept of a Nintendo Switch Pro. The Switch Pro is something that many people, including some of my fellow YouTubers and even my good friends, really believe in. I mean, there are some people who are just lock, stock, tied in tow with this concept. It's gonna happen. Nintendo is making a Switch Pro. Maybe it was gonna come out last year, and then maybe it got delayed until this year because of the pandemic and everything happening. And so a lot of people think that if it's gonna happen this year, 2021, is the time to release it. And I mean, it's an interesting idea. I'm not opposed to a Nintendo Switch Pro, but as I've already said at the beginning of the video here, I'm not personally all in on the Switch Pro idea for a couple of reasons. One of them is because a lot of you know I think the next-gen console may be sooner than a lot of us are expecting. The other reason is I don't even know if it necessarily is worth it for Nintendo to do. Would an upgraded Switch really change or add that much to Nintendo's business model and overall revenue? I mean, sure, they would definitely get something out of it, but I don't know if it would extend the life of the Switch for a significant amount of time, the way a lot of people want to think that it could, because now that we live in the next generation era where a PlayStation 5 and an Xbox Series X exist, I don't think that just upgrading the current 2017 model of the Switch to something a bit more capable is necessarily going far enough. Maybe if they had a chance to do this early last year, you know, well before the next generation launched from Sony and Microsoft, maybe that could have made a little bit more sense. But now, in a post-PS5 and Series X world, it's just harder for me to believe that it's going to make a big difference. Of course, initially, it would be great, it would be exciting, most of us would run out and buy one, I would buy one, so yeah, it's going to do fairly well, just like the Nintendo Switch Lite has done fairly well. So I'm not saying it would be like a loss for Nintendo, but would it achieve enough to justify the overall R&D, production, and then marketing and advertising they would have to do for it? Tough to say. Obviously, it would depend on what it could really do. Is it going to play games that can't play on the current Switch? Or is it going to play only the same Switch games but just make them look and play a little bit better? If they go far enough to create a unique library, then it makes a lot more sense. But if it's only upgrading everything that the current Switch titles do, and that's all it's ever going to do, it's just hard for me to think that it even makes sense for Nintendo to do it in the first place. But here's the thing, for the sake of this conversation in this video, we kind of have to roll with the punches a little bit, and for the sake of argument and discussion, we have to assume that there's a really good chance that the Switch Pro is even going to exist, which is fine. Even though I'm skeptical, I'm like maybe 40-60 on it. I'm willing and able to do that for the sake of this conversation about Breath of the Wild 2, just because, I don't know, it's just more fun and more interesting to do so. So, if a Switch Pro is very likely coming this year, or even guaranteed to be coming this year, does it suddenly make sense for that game to launch alongside of Breath of the Wild 2 and vice versa, so that Breath of the Wild 2 becomes the first ideal showcase for what the Switch Pro could do? Well, the way I see things, just like we would need to understand more of what a Switch Pro would actually be capable of doing, we also need to understand more about Zelda Breath of the Wild 2. Because if Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 would be meant to showcase a Nintendo Switch Pro, like a lot of people talk about, of course, you know, I mentioned at the beginning here, the genesis of this video and conversation is the fact that a lot of people think that it might make sense for this to happen this way. So for Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 to become an ideal showcase for a Switch Pro, that means that that game has to be pushing some boundaries and pushing the limits of the current Nintendo Switch beyond what it's capable of doing. And while obviously I think it's possible that that's what Breath of the Wild 2 is going to be doing, I think it's worth noting that based on the footage from that short trailer from E3 2019, we haven't seen anything that gives us any indication that this game is going to be looking or playing or running any more impressively than the original Breath of the Wild. And I should say that, I should clarify actually, because I do think it looks better than Breath of the Wild, but I don't think it looks better to the point that it couldn't run on the current Switch. To me, from the little bit we saw, which to be fair was really just cinematics and not gameplay, it really seems like this is going to be building on the same engine and graphical and art style, which means it's probably going to be a slightly modified version of that. I think it will overall look and play and run a little bit better, but I think that's more because Breath of the Wild was designed on the Wii U hardware, not on the Switch hardware. Now they're spending a couple of years building from the same engine something on the Switch hardware, which is better and more capable than the Wii U's. So I think it's going to be the better game, but again, in order to justify a Switch Pro, an upgraded Switch, to me that says the game needs to be pushing beyond the limits of what the current Switch could do. And I don't know, the feeling I got from that trailer, while very exciting, didn't make me feel like this is a next-gen Zelda game that couldn't possibly run on the current Switch. I just didn't get that vibe from it. But hey, as somebody who is so excited for Breath of the Wild 2, I am open to the possibilities. I would love to see that this game is confirmed and revealed, and we see gameplay and a title, and they tell us all these great things about it, and we see a game that blows our mind to such a degree, we know that that thing is going to need a Nintendo Switch Pro. And I mean, here's the thing. I can talk about not believing in a Switch Pro or not needing a Switch Pro and that Breath of the Wild 2 doesn't look next gen or whatever, but at the end of the day, I would still be excited for a Zelda game that is so amazing and impressive that it needs better hardware, and I am into the idea of improving the Switch's hardware, even if I don't need the Switch Pro to be real. So, you know, I definitely rest in kind of multiple camps here where it's just all about what makes the most sense and what becomes a reality. If the Switch Pro is a reality, as long as it's doing things that look cool and impress me, I'm going to be excited about it and I'm going to buy it, no matter how I feel about it right now. If Breath of the Wild 2 looks so unbelievably impressive that we know the Switch can't run it and it needs a Switch Pro, I'm going to be excited. I'm going to be happy to go and buy a Switch Pro and buy a Breath of the Wild 2 and experience this incredible game. But if we come off of our Cloud 9 excitement at the idea here and we come back to reality a little bit and think about what actually makes the most sense and what's the most possible, I still don't know that I overall believe this idea and theory that a lot of people have out there. I'm not even saying that I'm not believing in the Switch Pro. I'm just saying I don't know if Breath of the Wild 2 and the Switch Pro are meant to be married together as this big momentous release because one needs the other so much. The Switch Pro needs a huge game to justify selling it. Breath of the Wild 2 needs a Switch Pro to justify the power it requires. I mean, it's an exciting idea, as I've said, but I don't really know that I feel that. I do think, I will say this though, if a Switch Pro is real, I do think there's something to the overall concept of Nintendo wanting an ideal game to showcase the Nintendo Switch Pro and the power of it and to justify its existence. Just like they did with the new 3DS and Xenoblade Chronicles on the 3DS. Those released at the same time because one needed the other. The new 3DS needed some kind of game that justified its existence, and Xenoblade Chronicles needed the power of the new 3DS just to run. So that did happen in the past. But I think it all just comes down to my gut feeling, which is telling me that Breath of the Wild 2 isn't that showcase title, which in a weird way almost becomes exciting because then we start to think, what could that title be? Well, like I said near the beginning here, Metroid Prime 4 would probably be an ideal title for that, sure, but do any of us really think Metroid Prime 4 would be releasing this year, the same year we think a Switch Pro could release? I mean, you guys know that I don't think that. Maybe some of you do. Maybe there are other YouTubers and folks out there talking about it like it's possible. And anything is possible, but I don't believe in it. I'm putting my money on 2022 for Metroid Prime 4. You guys already know that. So I don't really think that Prime 4 could line up properly, but we do come to the other two random examples I gave off the top of my head earlier, a new Mario Kart or a new Mario game. And I do think that there's something to that. Both of those titles are titles, along with Prime 4, that I've kind of thrown out there in the past as possible cross-gen releases for the next-gen Nintendo's machine and the Switch. Not a Switch Pro, but the next-gen machine. But, of course, if I'm wrong on that prediction, then maybe the Switch Pro becomes that hardware. And instead, a Mario Kart 9 or a Mario Odyssey 2 or a new Mario adventure game, whatever the case, could be ideal games to release alongside of a Switch Pro. And I think maybe because we've already seen Breath of the Wild 2, we know enough about it to make me just feel that it's not the showcase title for a Switch Pro, that I think about games we haven't seen and that we don't know if they're real, a Mario Kart, a Mario game, or even some other game, that becomes a better example because we can't visualize that game in our heads the way we can with Breath of the Wild 2. So it becomes exciting to think about a new Mario adventure that's so incredible and beautiful looking that it needs more power than the Switch can handle. Like, that becomes really cool. So, I don't know, I guess to kind of wrap this up, this is just really how I feel. At the end of the day, this is just the typical Nintendo situation where it's hard and damn near impossible to predict what those guys are going to do. Which, you know, speaking for myself here, is actually one of my favorite parts about the company, and I think a lot of people might feel the same way. It's exciting that they always keep us on their toes and we don't know what they're doing. So much to the point that so many people can have this conversation about Breath of the Wild 2 and a Nintendo Switch Pro, and are they going to come out together because they're just going to be so amazing that they need each other in such a way. And, you know, even though I obviously told you that I don't really tend to believe a lot of this, it is exciting to think about. And if it ends up being real, like I already said, of course, I'm going to be excited. It's like, well, I guess I'm buying a Nintendo Switch Pro so I can play the best version of Breath of the Wild 2 possible. But of course, that would apply to any other game. If a Switch Pro is real, I want the best version of Mario Kart, of Super Smash Bros., of Metroid, of F-Zero, of a Kid Icarus, you know, of a Star Fox or a Pikmin 4, whatever games would come out to support and justify a Switch Pro. I mean, come on, man. I'm a Nintendo fan. I'm a lifelong gamer. Of course, I'd be excited to do these things. And I know that most of you guys would probably feel the same. So it's an interesting idea and an interesting theory and conversation that people have been having for a while. And so I wanted to kind of riff on it a little bit here. I know, you know, maybe this might seem like a downer video because I'm not super rah, go Switch Pro, like believing in all of this stuff. But this is just how I feel. It's still interesting and fun to talk about. So with that being said, these are my thoughts and opinions and theories about this whole idea. Of course, I do want to hear what you guys think. What do you think about my thoughts and everything that I laid out here today and my opinions on the topic, and what are your own? Maybe you agree with me completely, maybe you meet me halfway, maybe you disagree with me completely. Whatever you think, talk about it below. Of course, do not forget to subscribe to the channel if you like what you heard and what you saw here today. And with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of World of 2 Review, and I will catch you next time on another video. But I think it just